Welcome everyone to our Packers Chat, virtually alongside Ryan Wood. I am Olivia Reiner. It's been a little while since we've checked in with you guys and just talked some Packers, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. Both running back Aaron Jones and safety Adrian Amos spoke to the media today, so we'll be talking about some of the most interesting tidbits out of those conversations. But before we get into that, I want to remind you, you can be a part of our conversation as always. We love to hear from you. Whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, leave us a comment, leave us a question, any sort of feeling you're having, whether it's related to Aaron Jones or Adrian Amos or not. Perhaps it's about something else, and we will get to some of those thoughts toward the end of our conversation. Ryan, let's just start by talking about Aaron Jones and what he had to say in the conversation today. The biggest personnel news in the running backs room this offseason is the fact that the Packers added running back A.J. Dillon in the second round of the draft this year. You asked Aaron Jones about it. He said he wasn't surprised that Dillon was drafted. However, he also wasn't disappointed. He understands that the team's going to bring in competition. That is something that's simply out of his control. How will Dillon's arrival in the running backs room impact the workload among that rotation of running backs?
It's going to be very interesting to see how much the carries and the opportunities just running the football increase. You've got more people to give it to now. So in theory, you would think that would correlate with just running it more. Aaron Jones, the thing that he said today that stood out to me the most is that he desires to be a lifelong Packer. I desire to have $1 million. I mean, you don't always get what you want in life, and certainly with a running back and the realities of the market and how difficult it is for running backs to get what they believe their value is on the open market, it's far from a certainty that he's going to be a lifelong running back. We'll see what happens. Part of that's on A.J. Dillon and what happens with his development as a rookie. Do the Packers a year from now feel like they can move on and that they're good in the backfield with A.J. Dillon being their primary feature back? What does Aaron Jones do in his season? Aaron Jones said that he's only focused on what he can control, but kind of similar to Aaron Rodgers, really. It's a lot that is outside of his control.
Ryan, you mentioned that Aaron Jones would love to be a Packer for life. However, he's entering a contract season. And as we've known from seeing the way that other running backs have handled the open market and just kind of the demand that is there for them, they're either going to get paid by their teams a lot of money, or they're not going to get paid by their teams and some other team is going to pay them. So the Packers, in their case, in 2021, when Aaron Jones does become a free agent, they have to sign or decide if they want to extend players like defensive tackle Kenny Clark or left tackle David Bakhtiari and keep them on their team as well. They have some decisions that they need to make. How likely is it that Aaron Jones receives a contract extension from the Packers after this upcoming season?
You would think they're not going to overpay. And sometimes there might be a team out there that will pay top dollar if Aaron Jones does what he just did last season and he leads the league in touchdowns. He's an explosive playmaker. He's one of the premier backs in the league. He could get a team that on the open market would be willing to give him top dollar. So, we'll see what he has in store for an encore this year is going to play a big part of that. But as you said, the fact, and this is something, again, it's outside of his control, there's a lot of other key free agents whose time is going to come up after the 2020 season that the Packers also have to factor in. And how they make those priorities will be very interesting to see, to watch develop. I do think A.J. Dillon's development is a big part of this as well. But, you're going to have a running back, if he does what he did last year, that very deservedly is going to expect to be paid very well going forward in his next contract, because that's when you go out and you have 19 touchdowns, you have 1,500 yards from scrimmage, 1,000 yards rushing. That's what happens, especially if you do it again. And then you're going to have a team with a lot of tough decisions to make. So it really could come to a head. And if they can find an agreement that's great for both sides, I think there's interest in Aaron Jones returning with the Packers. But he's going to want to pay what he's worth, and the Packers are not going to want to overpay.
The Packers responsibility to figure out exactly what they're going to do with those 2021 free agents is going to be a really interesting storyline to follow, and we'll be talking about that more as the season continues. Speaking of Barron Jones, let's talk about a little bit of what he did last year. Jones played all 16 games last regular season and was quick to remind you, Ryan, that he also played in both games of the playoffs. So he played in all 18 games this past season. And like you said, Ryan, he led the NFL in rushing touchdowns with 16, tied with Tennessee's Derrick Henry. What kind of room does Jones have to grow in 2020?
I think it starts with making sure he's on the field for every game again. Yes, all 18. I mentioned to him, learning from the experience of playing all 16. He was very, very clear to correct me on the math. Not that that's uncommon. My math is usually poor. But, if doing that again, it's the baseline for everything, right? I mean, you can't do what he did last season if he's got injuries. And he said that he hasn't changed up his offseason prep aside from the reality that there's no OTAs and it's all virtual reality now. He hasn't really, he's done a lot of the same stuff that he did last year on his own during that time in the spring when players are responsible for their own conditioning and those sort of things. Didn't change it up. Felt really good about what he did. And if he's on the field, we know what he can do when he's healthy. When he's healthy, he is tough to tackle. He's got breakaway speed. He's shown last year that he can be a receiver just as well as a runner out of the backfield. Everything you want in a running back, and he's come, by the way, pretty far away with his pass pro as well. So everything you want is there. You just got to stay on the field.
Big question, will they want to keep him around depending on how he plays this upcoming season, depending on how A.J. Dillon develops this season? A lot of big questions in the running backs room heading into 2020. Let's move on to discussing Adrian Amos, who we also heard from in today's press conference. The biggest news out of Amos today was that, if you remember, he finished the 2019 season in the NFC Championship game with a pectoral injury. He said today that he did not need any procedure to treat that injury, and he's feeling 100% recovered. So that's good news for the Packers and for that defensive backs room. Amos is interesting. He's set to become the oldest defensive back on the Packers now that safety and cornerback, most recently cornerback, Tramon Williams, has now departed the team via free agency. Who knows if he will return? He remains unsigned. What is the team's expectation for Amos as a leader on and off the field in his second year in defensive coordinator Mike Pettine's system?
He's going to be the guy now. He's the elder statesman in that secondary with Tramon Williams. It looks like he'll be gone. So, it's going to be interesting to see how he takes that leadership role. And Olivia, I know you asked him exactly about that today and what kind of a leadership imprint he's going to have in that secondary. He said he's not a rah-rah guy, but you know what? Tramon Williams wasn't a rah-rah guy either. So it's probably going to be a lot of the same, a lot of continuity in terms of the type of voice that is being heard and the leadership style coming out of that secondary. When you get the contract that he got a year ago and you've got the most years and you've got the most service time, and that comes with the territory. He's going to be the leader now.
Speaking of leadership on the defense, the Packers did not bring back inside linebacker Blake Martinez, who became a free agent this offseason, and now he is off to the New York Giants. One of the big roles that Martinez played in the Packers offense is that he was, quote unquote, the quarterback of the defense. He was the one to bring in the play call to the huddle on the field and make sure that the defense was all set up and ready to go. Amos said today that someone's going to have to take over in that role. Someone else's voice is going to have to be heard on the field. Who knows exactly who that's going to be, but as the season continues or as training camp hopefully goes on, we will have a little bit more clarity as to who that person will be. What challenges will that transition bring in terms of who the transition between defensive quarterbacks, if you will that bring for the Packers defense?
It'll be interesting to see who they give the communication helmet to now. That it's not going to be Blake Martinez. You look at Blake Martinez's production, and it's pretty easy to start with the tackles because that's what pops out on the stat sheet. And he's top 3, easily top 5 in tackles the last 3 years. He's a tackles machine, which in defensive coordinator Mike Pettine's system, That's how they want their linebackers to play. They should always be around the football. Defensive line takes care of the blockers. They want the inside linebackers flowing to the ball and making plays and getting tackles. I mean, that's their job. He did that very well, but really it's not the physical part, the production part. It's the communication part that is going to be by far the biggest difference with not having Blake Martinez in the middle of this Packers defense now. And who they give the communication helmet to, whether that might be an Adrian Amos, whether they may drop it back to the safety level, especially because Adrian Amos is a safety that's around the line of scrimmage a lot. That will be interesting to see. You look at the inside linebacker position, it's a lot of young, unproven guys, Oren Burks, Ty Summers. You don't know what they can give you because you haven't really seen it yet. And I do think until they show that, there's a healthy amount of skepticism of what they can give. So, Curtis Bolton is kind of the same way. So what they get from that position remains to be seen, and how this defense reacts to maybe a lack of experience at the very least, if not authority that they had with Blake Martinez in the middle, is going to be really interesting to see what changes there are.
It'll be interesting to see who exactly gets the helmet of responsibility, if you will, in this Packers defense in 2020. With that, everyone, let's move on to some of your questions. We love to hear from you. It's been so long since we've spoken to you, so it's good to hear from all of you. Let's start with this question from Eric, which is a good one, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. He asks, are the Packers draft picks, is the signing of the Packers draft picks officially being slowed down by the coronavirus? Yesterday, the Packers announced that they signed 7th-round pick Jonathan Garvin to the Packers roster. It's the first official signing. The Packers now have 8 more signings they need to get through. Ryan, why is this process taking so long?
I don't know that's really taking that long yet. It's still May. I'd have to go back and look at how it's been pretty quick since the league went to the slotted formula for each pick, and there's not a lot of but not a lot of wiggle room for negotiations with rookie contracts anymore. I've always, if it's July, I would say it's getting longer. If it gets to July, but May, June, I don't think there's anything to be alarmed about yet.
Patience is a virtue, Ryan. Thank you, Eric, for your question. Let's move on to Norman's question here, and this is something that Jim Ozarski and I spoke about a couple weeks ago as we start to go through the position groups, talking about who might stay, who might have to leave as a result of some competition on the roster. One of those competitions is at quarterback, and that's between quarterbacks Jordan Love, the Packers' first overall pick in the 2020 draft, and the Packers' backup in quarterback Tim Boyle. Norman asks, will the Packers keep Tim Boyle on the 53 because of what's going on this offseason and the limited on-field opportunity there might be leading up to the season? Or will they decide that Boyle needs to go and let Jordan Love have the reins? Will Jordan Love be ready to have the reins as the backup quarterback? There's some pretty interesting questions. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but Ryan, what is your theory? What will happen to Tim Boyle this upcoming season?
That's a great question. I would think that it's more likely than not that he'll be on the roster. If you look at this, is for any rookie quarterback. Joe Burrow is going to the Cincinnati Bengals. What they're going to do with this offseason, getting a rookie quarterback ready to play, is really fascinating. And so Joe Burrow on down. Any rookie quarterback with so little hands-on training this offseason to get ready to be able to contribute in any meaningful way this fall, it's got to be a nightmare for teams. And so I think that it's probably likely that Tim Boyle, if there's an injury to Aaron Rodgers and you got to have a backup trot out from the sideline to win a game, that Tim Boyle this season, especially early on this season, is going to be more prepared and more ready to have that type of responsibility than any rookie quarterback, Jordan Love included. So, yeah, I think that, it's always better safe than sorry at that position especially. So 3 quarterbacks is playing it very, very safe when one of those happens to be a first-round rookie. You don't always see that. But given the realities of this offseason, the challenges of getting new guys ready to go, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I'd almost be a little surprised if they didn't keep 3 quarterbacks.
Just 2 seasons ago, the Packers kept Deshaun Kaiser and Tim Boyle to back up Aaron Rodgers on the 53-man roster. It would not be unheard of if they decided to carry 3 quarterbacks, especially in this environment currently. Thank you, Norman, for your question. Let's move on here to Levi. Levi asks, is Packers tight end Jay Sternberger set to take a big year 2 leap? The Packers brought back veteran tight end Mercedes Lewis, who is known to be one of the better blocking tight ends in this league. Jimmy Graham has departed for the Chicago Bears, and the Packers still have, second year was a rookie tight end, Jay Sternberger. They also still have Robert Tonyan, and they added on Josiah DeGuara in this year's draft in the 3rd round. It's an interesting tight ends room, and Jay Sternberger does stand out as someone who was a draft pick last year that didn't really get to prove himself to his full potential due to injury throughout the season last year, as someone who might be slated to have a big year in his 2nd year in the NFL. Ryan, what are the Packers' expectations for Sternberger in his 2nd year?
They sure seem to think that he's ready to be a pretty significant contributor on offense. We'll see. It'll be very interesting when and if there's a training camp this season to see how he looks in year 2. It doesn't help him, and this is the critical offseason, regardless of position, for any player going into their 2nd year. And that's your first full offseason. Year 1, going into the draft, it's all about how do they test? Do they have the good track numbers, the 40 time? It's not a lot about football, and then you have to make a very quick transition to being about football after the draft. It's entirely different when you have your first full offseason. So to not have all this time, how much that affects everybody in this position, but Jay Sternberger especially, because he is a guy that they're going to rely on. They're going to want him to be a contributor in the passing game. It certainly helps that he had his first career touchdown in San Francisco in the NFC Championship game, probably the brightest positive that came out of that game for a team that just had none other. I mean, it was a total annihilation in every way. But Jay Sternberger did catch a touchdown on that stage, and that is something that can propel you going forward. So, I think that he's going to have some confidence coming into this year 2. It's just a matter of development and how he handles the lack of hands-on teaching this offseason.
We'll see if his development is able to show this upcoming season. Last question here from David. David asks, how many running backs will the Packers end up carrying on the final 53-man roster? The big question, and Jim Ozarski and I spoke about this the last time we met and had a little breakdown of some of the position groups heading into the 2020 season. Running backs is an interesting one with the addition of Tyler Ervin, who is, in addition to being a running back, is also the return specialist for the team. And there's also a big question mark surrounding Dexter Williams, who was drafted by the Packers last season. And the fact that he didn't really get any playing time whatsoever this past season does not bode well for him coming into 2020 when the Packers drafted a running back in A.J. Dillon in the 2nd round. How likely is it, Ryan, that Dexter Williams isn't on that 53-man roster come the beginning of the season?
Yeah, it wasn't a great draft for Dexter Williams, and he does have practice squad eligibility. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he started the season on the practice squad. I think the Packers like him. They obviously like his potential. You go back to the draft last year, they feel like his burst in that outside zone scheme is something that it fits well schematically. But he is someone, as a rookie, there was a steep learning curve, and you saw that in his lack of playing time. And kind of the Packers effectively gave him a red shirt. Another year to learn could be very beneficial for a guy who's got a lot of talent, a lot of physical potential. And I think a team that is excited and doesn't want to lose sight of that yet, but is clearly – I mean, when you go and draft a 2nd-round running back at that same position, that guy's going to play. So it's going to be really interesting because, remember, Tyler Ervin, too, he factors in – he's a special teamer. He's a return specialist. That's his most direct contribution. But he's a running back offensively. I mean, that's how he factors in position-wise. So they've got a lot of numbers there. I think they want a lot of numbers there. And that's how Matt LaFleur wants to play, with running the football and keeping them fresh. Very similar to San Francisco 49ers last year and having a three-pronged attack in the backfield. They'll have that this year. So I think that there's going to be a bit of a bloated position, and they'll probably steal from other positions when it comes to making the 53. But, yeah, Dexter Williams especially, big offseason for him. Another guy, just like Jay Sternberger, first full offseason. How he handles that is going to be everything.
We'll see exactly who ends up making the cut, what positions end up running a little bit thin, and which positions end up carrying a few more players. All good questions to have heading into the rest of the offseason program and into training camp, hopefully in July. That's going to do it for us today, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back either later in the week or sometime next week to check in with you, depending on what news is going on, and just to talk about how the roster is shaping up this offseason and what it might look like when it comes time for the teams to put together their initial rosters at the beginning of the season. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.